The availability heuristic. There's a strange way the mind decides what is dangerous. It doesn't measure probabilities. It doesn't consult statistics. It asks a simpler question. What comes to mind first? This is the availability heuristic, the psychological shortcut where we judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples appear in memory. 1. When memory becomes reality. The availability heuristic occurs when people assume that events are more common, more likely, or more important simply because they are easier to recall. If something is vivid, recent, emotional, or repeatedly mentioned, the mind treats it as frequent, not because it is, but because it is available. A dramatic story outweighs quiet data. A single image outweighs thousands of statistics, and memory quietly replaces measurement. 2. Why the brain trusts what it remembers. The human brain evolved under pressure. Quick decisions matter more than accurate ones. If something came to mind easily, it was often because it had been relevant before. Availability meant relevance. Relevance meant survival. So the brain learned a shortcut. If I can recall it quickly, it must matter. But in modern life, this shortcut misfires. Information is no longer rare. Emotionally charged stories are everywhere, and the brain cannot tell the difference between frequency and exposure. 3. Vividness over probability. One of the defining traits of the availability heuristic is that vivid events dominate judgment. Rare but dramatic dangers feel more threatening than common, quiet ones. Plane crashes feel more likely than car accidents. Violence feels omnipresent after headlines. Personal anecdotes outweigh long-term trends. The mind asks, can I picture it? If the answer is yes, the risk feels real. For media, repetition, and perceived danger, the availability heuristic is amplified by repetition. The more often something is mentioned, the more normal it feels. The more emotionally charged it is, the more easily it is remembered. News cycles, social media, and constant alerts flood the mind with select examples, not representative ones, but attention-grabbing ones. And over time, perception drifts away from reality. Fear grows not from likelihood, but from recall. 5. Personal experience as universal truth. The availability heuristic also operates internally. A single personal experience can overshadow broader context. If it happened to me, it must be common. If I've seen it once, it must be everywhere. Personal memory feels authoritative. But memory is not a database. It is a storyteller. It prioritizes emotion, not accuracy. 6. The moral cost of availability. The availability heuristic does more than distort risk. It shapes empathy. We feel more concern for problems we can imagine than for those we cannot picture. Suffering that is visible feels urgent. Suffering that is abstract feels distant. This creates uneven compassion, not because people don't care, but because their minds cannot access what they rarely see. 7. Availability in decision-making. This bias quietly influences choices. Policies are shaped by recent events. Judgments are influenced by memorable mistakes. Reputations are defined by standout moments. The most recent example becomes the reference point, not because it is most relevant, but because it is most available. 8. Slowing the shortcut. The availability heuristic cannot be eliminated, but it can be interrupted. Awareness creates distance between memory and meaning. Ask, is this likely or just memorable? What information am I not recalling? What would the data say? Slowing the reaction restores proportion. 9. Choosing evidence over impression. Responsibility begins when we question the mind's shortcuts. When we resist letting vivid stories replace broader understanding. When we recognize that what feels urgent is not always what is most probable. Clarity requires effort, but effort restores fairness. 10. Responsibility beyond recall. The availability heuristic reveals a quiet truth. The mind mistakes memory for reality. What comes to mind first is not always what matters most. This is Ethiax, where psychology meets responsibility. And responsibility begins when recall no longer replaces reasoning.